He had come out that day with only one goal: buy a sandwich, eat it in peace, and return to the workshop before his supervisor started yelling again. That was it. A simple, beautiful dream. No chaos. No drama. No strange events. The most exciting thing he expected was maybe getting the last bag of chips before someone else took it. That was the height of thrill he could manage on a weekday. He was halfway through opening the sandwich wrapper when every instinct in his body told him something was approaching fast, very fast, and he wasn't even given a full second to turn around before something soft slammed into his back. Arms wrapped around his waist. A tail, yes, a tail, coiled around his leg. And a trembling body pressed itself flush behind him. He froze mid-bite. There was a sound behind him, a soft vibrating trill that reminded him of a frightened kitten. Except kittens didn't dig their claws, or what felt like claws, into his shirt while shaking like they were about to explode. He glanced down at the tail latched around his leg. Pale blue. Smooth. Flexible. Definitely not human. He turned his head just enough to see a pair of glowing yellow eyes peering over his shoulder, wide with panic. The alien girl held onto him like he was the last piece of solid ground in a collapsing world. Hey! He tried. The girl responded by burying her face between his shoulder blades, clinging harder. Her entire body vibrated with tension, trembling as if she expected something to grab her at any moment. He could feel her breath against his back, fast, shallow, desperate. She was terrified. It didn't matter that he had no idea who she was. Fear like that didn't need an introduction. Without even thinking, he placed a hand on her arm, intending to gently move her away and ask what was wrong. But the moment his hand touched her, she whimpered and curled tighter behind him like he was a shield. People nearby slowed down, staring, whispering, unsure whether to intervene or run the other direction. He tried to pry her off, but the girl clung so tightly he might as well have been trying to remove industrial glue with a toothpick. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered. He didn't know why he whispered, but something about the way she was shaking made his voice automatically soften. "Whatever scared you, it's gone. You're safe." He made the mistake of wrapping both arms around her to steady her. And the world changed. The alien girl gasped, sharp, startled, then melted against him as if someone had turned her bones to warm liquid. Her trembling stopped instantly. A strange warmth radiated from her skin, flowing into him like a living pulse. She pressed her forehead between his shoulder blades, exhaling a long, breathy sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Then came the purring. Not a cat-like purr. Deeper. Stronger. A full-body vibration that resonated through him like a gentle engine hum. Her tail tightened around his leg with a slow, deliberate squeeze. He swallowed. What just happened?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she slid her hands up his torso, fingers spreading over his chest like she was memorizing the shape of him. The purring grew louder. Then she declared something, soft, melodic, but utterly incomprehensible. It wasn't English. Or any language he recognized. Yet the tone was unmistakable: relief. Claiming. Satisfaction. People really stared now. He tried stepping back, but she followed, glued to him. He turned left, she matched the movement instantly. He stepped right, she moved like a shadow. He could feel the soft press of her body from shoulders to knees, perfectly aligned with him, held close like a lover reunited after war. She refused to loosen her grip by even an inch. A tall, silver-skinned alien vendor watched them with wide eyes, then slowly covered his mouth in shock. You performed the protective hold." "The what?" The vendor looked between them, horrified. "You wrapped both arms around her during a fear state. That is the imprinting gesture." "Imprinting?" The vendor nodded gravely. Meanwhile, the alien girl behind him purred louder, rubbing her cheek against his back. He felt sweat forming on his forehead. "I didn't imprint anything. I was just trying to calm her down." "That," the vendor said, "is exactly how imprinting happens. Her species forms lifelong bonds through physical contact when frightened. The first being who holds them close becomes their chosen protector. Their mate. The human nearly choked. Their what? The vendor pointed at the girl. She has chosen you. I didn't choose anything. The alien girl peeked over his shoulder again, now entirely calm, eyes half-lidded like a content cat. She murmured something in her language and pressed closer, her tail curling more tightly as if to emphasize the point. People around them started whispering things like, "Congratulations," and "Lucky human," and "She's adorable." He shook his head frantically. No, no, no. I didn't agree to anything. I didn't sign anything. You don't sign, the vendor said. You held. That's not legally binding. In her culture, the vendor replied, it very much is. He could feel the girl smiling against his back as she purred like an overloaded generator. He tried to step forward again. She followed instantly. He stopped abruptly. She collided with him softly, then wrapped both arms around his waist again with a possessive little squeeze. He lowered his voice. You're not really stuck to me, right? She stared at him with glowing eyes and purred louder. Great, he muttered. I'm engaged to an alien by accident. The vendor nodded sympathetically. It happens more often than you'd think. And the girl behind him, hearing that, pressed her cheek firmly to his back and whispered something that translated through sheer tone as, Yes. Mine. He had thought the worst of the situation was over when they left the crowded street behind, but as soon as they reached the small apartment he rented, the alien girl didn't let go for a second. Every step he took, she mirrored like a shadow, tail looping around his waist as if it were some kind of flexible leash. He opened the door, hoping she would wait on the threshold, but no. She stepped in first, pressed against his back, and let out a soft trill that clearly meant, this is mine now. He tried to maneuver around her, to make a little space, but every slight motion only made her cling tighter. She was warm, heavier than he expected, and shockingly persistent. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with you, he muttered, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, hoping to communicate a subtle request to loosen up. Instead, she pressed closer, curling her tail around his leg like a snake and burying her head near the crook of his arm. Her purring was now so strong that he could feel the vibrations up his spine. He realized, with equal parts panic and reluctant fascination, that she wasn't going anywhere. At least not voluntarily. He started making dinner. A simple task in his mind, heat up something edible, maybe some noodles. But every time he turned, she followed like an overenthusiastic backpack, pressing herself against his side, occasionally tugging on his shirt as if to guide him through the process. Her curiosity was unrelenting. She sniffed at the food, poked at the utensils, and muttered incomprehensible sounds that clearly meant, I will help you because I am your protector and therefore responsible for all human sustenance. He laughed nervously, realizing he now had an alien life form micromanaging his cooking in a way that was both invasive and oddly comforting. The true horror came a little later. He had finished eating and decided it was time for the bathroom. Maybe a few precious minutes of solitude. But he wasn't prepared for the full-blown panic attack that erupted when he tried to close the door behind him. There was a frantic squeak, then a jolt of movement against the door. Before he could react, the door was practically wrenched open and she was inside, tail wrapped around his waist again, her hands clinging to his arms. Privacy is a threat, she said in her own language, the translation device humming in protest. Privacy? He asked, gripping the edge of the sink. I'm just trying to. You are safe, she interrupted with a trill, pressing against him, her body vibrating softly. We must remain connected. He sighed, realizing he would not get even a minute alone. She perched herself on the edge of the bathtub, tail still securely looped, and tilted her head like a cat deciding whether the humans would pass the test of trust. It was terrifying and ridiculous at the same time. His cheeks burned, not entirely from embarrassment, but from the sheer absurdity of being lectured on personal space by someone who didn't believe in it. Later, she followed him to the couch, climbing onto his lap mid-sentence when he tried to call a friend. She purred loudly every time the phone rang, apparently deciding the call was a threat to him and therefore to her. He attempted to explain she shouldn't sit there, that she was making it impossible to reach the buttons, but she interpreted it as playful teasing, pressing even closer, tilting her head, and wrapping both arms around his chest with the kind of possessive warmth that made him want to laugh and groan at the same time. Friends who came over immediately assumed they were a couple. He had to wave off invitations for coffee, lunch, and weekend trips while she glared at anyone who dared to smile at him, tail twitching with unmistakable ownership. She would even hiss softly if someone got too close, low and vibrating, like a security system no human could disable. He kept trying to explain that no, they weren't together, that he was not, in fact, romantically committed to her by human standards. She kept pressing closer, emitting soft trills and murmurs that translated to, "You held me close in danger. Therefore we are mates." Even sitting on the couch, he could not escape. She draped herself across him entirely, one arm looped over his shoulders, tail curled around his waist, and a leg draped across his lap. He tried shifting to the side, but she adjusted with uncanny precision. Every movement he made only increased the warmth of her body pressing against him. "I don't think I can move without breaking some cosmic law," he admitted with a nervous laugh. She responded by nuzzling against his chest and purring louder. It didn't stop there. As the evening stretched on, he discovered that she had an annoying habit of interpreting anything he did as an act of bonding. Pouring water into a glass? Bond. Stretching after sitting for too long? Bond. Sneezing? Definitely bond. Each action was met with immediate closeness, a curling of her tail, or a purring vibration that seemed almost sentient. He realized he had unwittingly triggered a life-altering commitment ceremony without a single signature or legal formality, just a hug at the right moment during a minor panic. Despite his growing panic, a small, inexplicable part of him enjoyed it. There was something absurdly satisfying in feeling this kind of trust and reliance, even if it came from a creature whose cultural norms were completely alien to him. She had decided he was hers, and she made no effort to hide it. Every movement, every purr, every tail curl screamed ownership, affection, and a kind of devotion he had never experienced. By the time night fell, he had reluctantly accepted his new reality. There would be no personal space, no privacy, and no escape from constant purring, tail squeezes, and soft murmurs of possessive devotion. He glanced down at her sprawled across his lap, tail tucked around him like a living belt, and muttered under his breath, "I guess I'm stuck with you." Her ears twitched, a soft trill escaping her throat, and she nuzzled closer as if confirming his statement. Stuck. Permanently. And somehow, it was both terrifying and thrilling. He had thought he understood the consequences of the bond, but stepping outside the apartment made it abundantly clear that he had not even scratched the surface. Every step down the street, she clung to him like a living, purring backpack, tail looped securely around his waist, hands gripping his arms in ways that made it impossible to wave or gesture without dragging her along. The world seemed to notice immediately. Strangers gave them a wide berth, whispering, pointing, some snapping photos discreetly. He realized, with a sinking sense of dread, that they looked exactly like a couple, an utterly inseparably odd couple. He tried to explain to a passerby that they weren't together. She responded by tightening her arms around his torso and letting her head rest against his back, tail curling even more possessively. Her purring intensified, a low, vibrating rumble that made his chest resonate in ways he wasn't sure were entirely healthy. The passerby blinked, shrugged, and moved on muttering, "Must be serious then." He groaned and started walking faster, but the alien girl simply matched his pace without effort, adjusting her steps to stay perfectly in rhythm with him. Every interaction in public became a potential disaster. He entered the local cafe to grab coffee, only for her to vault onto his lap as soon as he found a seat. She pressed against him, murmuring contentedly whenever anyone else came near. A delivery person tried to hand him a package. She leaned forward, tail flicking threateningly, and let out a soft hiss. The delivery person jumped back, apologizing profusely. He attempted to explain. "It's not what it looks like." she trilled loudly, pressing closer. It looks like exactly what it is, he muttered under his breath. The bond created subtle but relentless chaos. Whenever he tried to talk to friends, she interrupted in the most passive-aggressive way possible, draping herself across him, purring loudly, and nudging her head into his chest. If anyone laughed at a joke or tried to tease him, she hissed or wrapped her tail tighter around his waist, ears twitching in warning. He had to physically hold his arms up to keep her from lunging forward and defending him. Every time, she looked disappointed, the kind of expression that clearly meant, "You're failing your protective role as my chosen mate." At work, the situation only escalated. Sitting at his desk, she decided the chair was too small, so she climbed onto his lap, tail curling around the backrest, practically fusing with his body. When coworkers came by, she purred and leaned against him, effectively monopolizing his space and making any attempt at conversation impossible. One coworker joked, "Wow, looks like you finally found someone who can't get enough of you." She growled softly at him and bared a small flash of teeth. He tried to explain that they weren't together, that she was culturally bonded, not romantically. She tilted her head, purring, as if to say, "Incorrect. You are mine." He attempted research in secret, tapping into alien databases to find a way to break the imprint. He found warnings that the bond could be emotionally catastrophic if interrupted. Every time he muttered the words, she heard him through the bond and pressed tighter, purring louder. The more he tried to distance himself, the more attached she became. It was physically impossible to escape without moving to another planet. But amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. In a rare moment, when she had paused her constant press of tail and arms, he noticed the small details. The way her breathing slowed when he rested a hand on her back. The subtle curl of her fingers around his arm when he guided her somewhere safe. The way her body vibrated against his as if syncing with his own heartbeat. It was intimate, yes, invasive, undeniably overwhelming, but also comforting. He realized that the alien girl trusted him utterly. Completely. Without hesitation. She had chosen him, in her own biological, cultural way, and he couldn't deny the warmth it brought him. The realization hit like a ton of bricks. He liked her. Or at least, he liked what this bond did to him, how it made him feel needed, important, protective, and uncomfortably enough, desirable. Every purr, every press of her tail, every soft vibration against him reminded him that he mattered to someone more than he ever had in his ordinary human life. It was overwhelming, but also thrilling. He found himself adjusting his own behavior without thinking, holding her a little longer, moving a little slower, talking in softer tones, even leaning into her touch just slightly. She responded with immediate contentment, pressing closer, tail curling with satisfaction. She whispered in her language, which the translator hummed softly, "We are together. Forever." He laughed nervously, thinking, not forever, yet the absurdity of it all made him pause. He realized he wasn't just tolerating her presence, he was enjoying it. The warmth, the closeness, the constant, unyielding affection, it was intoxicating. Every interruption, every misunderstanding, every public spectacle was a small price for the connection he now felt. By the end of the day, as they walked home, he had come to a reluctant understanding. He could try to resist. He could try to insist they weren't together. But the truth was impossible to ignore. She had chosen him, and he was slowly choosing her right back, even if only subconsciously. She leaned against him, tail firmly around his waist, purring in approval, and he realized that, for all the chaos, embarrassment, and absurdity, he might not want to undo what had been set in motion. He had resigned himself to the chaos, or so he thought, but that night brought a new level of absurdity. She refused to leave his side even as he prepared for bed. Every movement was synchronized, every step countered with her tail tightening, her hands pressing against him, and her soft purring vibrating into his chest. He glanced down at her, sprawled across the couch like a tiny, purring octopus with the tail leash, and muttered under his breath, "I can't even stretch without triggering some sort of alien emergency." She responded by nuzzling his hand and letting out a long, contented trill that clearly meant, "You are mine. Do not attempt to deny it." When he finally crawled under the blanket, she was already there, tail wrapped expertly around his waist like she had practiced it for hours, arms draped over his torso in an impressively precise hold, and head tucked under his chin. He sighed, resigned, but found that he didn't entirely mind. In fact, he realized that he had been waiting for something exactly like this without ever knowing it. The weight of her closeness, the warmth of her body, the vibration of her purrs, it was oddly comforting, intoxicating even. He shifted slightly, and she responded immediately, adjusting, tightening, purring louder, as if rewarding him for the smallest acknowledgement of mutual consent. "You know," he whispered, "this is going to be a long night." She tilted her head, ears flicking in a way that translated perfectly through tone, "It's supposed to be." Her definition of long night did not involve sleeping separately. She insisted on physical contact for safety, and she clearly considered his body her territory. When he tried to roll over, she shifted, tail tightening, arms holding him in place gently but firmly, purring in low waves that resonated through him like a built-in massage. Every protest he made was met with an affectionate trill and a subtle, teasing nudge against his chest. She was claiming him, and she wanted him to know it. He had to laugh, a soft, helpless chuckle, which she interpreted as a sign of trust. She pressed closer, nudged her cheek against his shoulder, and whispered in her language a phrase that the translator hummed softly, "Protector, mate, always." He shivered involuntarily, partly from warmth, partly from the ridiculous intensity of the situation. His apartment was small, the blanket too short, and yet somehow he felt like they were perfectly intertwined. Morning came with an alarming degree of precision. He awoke to the sensation of her tail slithering across his stomach, curling back around his waist like a living belt. Her hands clung to his arms as if afraid he would vanish if she let go, and the vibration of her purring had reached a pitch that made his chest resonate as though he had slept inside a mini thunderstorm. His eyes opened to see her glowing yellow eyes half-lidded, staring at him with pure adoration and mild amusement, and he realized that, somehow, they had entered a routine he could never have anticipated. He tried to shift slightly, careful not to provoke a full-scale panic response, and she responded immediately, purring louder and snuggling closer. He could feel her warmth radiating into him, her tiny body somehow asserting dominance while also offering comfort. She whispered again in her language, the translation humming softly, "Stay close. Protect me. We belong together." He froze for a moment, incredulous, then sighed. "I guess we do," he admitted, and she rewarded him with a satisfied trill, tail tightening around him possessively. Later, a neighbor knocked on the door, presumably to borrow sugar or maybe to comment on the strange, glowing, purring alien now glued to him. The alien girl's reaction was immediate. She rose from his lap, tail whipping protectively, and purred a sharp warning. When the neighbor peeked inside, she boldly announced, translation humming faintly, "He held me close. We are mates." The neighbor blinked, stammered, and retreated slowly, leaving him to stare at her in equal parts disbelief and resignation. He shook his head, half laughing, half mortified. "I did not sign up for this," he muttered. She responded by pressing cheek to chest and curling fully against him, tail weaving around him like a soft, pulsing rope. She purred so loudly that it nearly drowned out his words, but it was okay. He didn't need to talk. She had claimed him. He had, in some absurd, unavoidable way, claimed her back. By the end of the day, he had come to a reluctant conclusion: he was engaged. Not legally. Not formally. Not even consensually in the human sense. But engaged in every way that mattered to an alien species capable of lifelong bonds through physical touch and constant closeness. She had chosen him, and he, in turn, had decided to embrace it. As they settled down that night, wrapped together like an impossibly tight puzzle, he realized that despite the chaos, embarrassment, and constant invasion of personal space, he was genuinely happy. Every purr, every press of her tail, every clingy movement was a reminder that he mattered, that he was needed, and, if he was honest, even that he was loved. She hummed softly against him, tail tightening once more, and he whispered, almost unconsciously, "I guess I'm yours." Her response was immediate. She purred louder, nuzzled him closer, and whispered in her language, which the translator hummed faintly, "Yes. Forever." He laughed softly, a mixture of disbelief, exasperation, and fondness, and for the first time, he realized that maybe this was exactly where he was meant to be, tangled in alien warmth, claimed in ways he couldn't resist, and engaged to a species that had no concept of personal boundaries, but the best instincts for love he could imagine.